He didn't collapse, but the brain had been signaling for weeks, a true story that made me, a brain doctor, stop in my tracks. Arizona, a sunny morning, cool breeze, and nothing unusual. Mr. Thomas, 72 years old, still took his daily walk, still wore that old gray windbreaker, and still counted every step. That morning, he stepped out as always, with only one difference: he couldn't find his way back home. No fall. No loss of consciousness. No headache. He just stood silently in front of the road he had walked for the past 10 years, and didn't know where he was. The family thought he was tired. Thought it was just old age. Thought he would be fine in a few days. But just 3 days later, he suffered a mild stroke. A brief blockage in the brain's lobe, enough to take away his sense of direction, and mark the early stages of serious brain decline. I still remember very clearly the day he was brought to the hospital. When I read the MRI results, I had to sit for a long time. Not because the stroke was too severe, but because the damaged brain area had been deteriorating quietly for weeks, even months. The earliest signals weren't in his blood pressure, not in his limbs, but in the unnoticed lapses in memory. It was the hippocampus, the region that holds memory, orientation, and perception of reality. I was very shocked. And very sad. Because if someone had paid attention to that first slight disorientation, if Mr. Thomas had been screened earlier, that stroke might never have happened. What gave me even more chills is that hundreds of patients I've seen since then all share the same pattern. And maybe it's happening right now in you, or someone you love, and no one has noticed yet. What shocked me more than anything is that this brain region had been quietly declining before and no one noticed. And maybe it's also quietly weakening inside you. The forgotten part of the brain. It doesn't scream. It doesn't signal. But when it shuts down, it's gone forever. After Mr. Thomas's story, I began to pay more attention to something I myself once overlooked: the hippocampus, a small region deep inside the brain that doesn't look like much, yet carries an immense responsibility, preserving memory, navigating space, connecting your past and present into a meaningful flow of life. If the brain were a vast library, then the hippocampus would be the quiet librarian. It's the one who remembers where you put your keys, who you met yesterday, and what you're planning to do next. It stores time, space, context, and anchors you to reality. The problem is, that librarian works silently. No yelling. No attention seeking. If you neglect it, it doesn't sound the alarm. It simply retreats quietly. This is the part of the brain most vulnerable to early damage when cerebral circulation declines, especially in older adults. Just a little less blood, oxygen, or not enough deep sleep, and the hippocampus will begin to shut down, one section at a time. But no one feels that right away. Because it doesn't cause pain. It only makes you hesitate when telling an old story. Pause slightly when trying to recall someone's name. Feel a bit confused between three familiar roads. It's strange because you still feel healthy. Still walk, still eat, still talk. But something has started to slip away in the background, like a film that's slowly losing its sound. I call it the silence of memory. And it's often the first step toward an unexpected stroke. One of the reasons I decided to make this video is because too many patients have been misunderstood. They were told it was just old age, scolded for repeating themselves, dismissed when they said they got lost in their own home. But they are not weak. They just have one part of the brain quietly getting weaker. But when that part of the brain begins to speak, it doesn't shout its name. It only whispers through the smallest signs. And that's when you need to recognize it. 5 early signs, but no one notices. It's not a disease. It's the first whisper from a brain region fading away. I used to believe that restoring the hippocampus required special medications, complex training, or expensive devices. But after 20 years of observing thousands of patients, I realized a humble yet powerful truth: small, consistent changes are the deepest medicine for memory. Below are 5 seemingly simple actions that have helped many patients keep their voice, clarity, and precious pieces of memory. And if you stay consistent, I believe your hippocampus will also revive gently and steadily, just like life itself. Handwriting each morning 5 minutes to remember yourself. Grandma Helen, 84, in Michigan, writes a few lines every morning in a small notebook: what day it is, how the weather feels, how her mood is. Nothing long, nothing fancy, but consistent. She says, when my hand writes, my brain remembers. Every word I write is a way to keep myself present. Handwriting activates language, navigation, and short-term memory areas, 3 brain functions that often decline first. It seems like a small act, but for the brain, it's a gentle morning wake-up call. And in those scribbled words, your brain is learning to breathe again, like a heart returning to its familiar rhythm. But what if you're not used to writing? There's another way, even simpler. Retell old stories, but to someone who truly listens. Mr. Henry, 76 years old, became withdrawn after his wife passed, until his granddaughter asked him to tell a story each night over the phone. Each time, he had to recall a friend's name, a familiar perfume, music from his youth. After a few weeks, he didn't just remember, he felt alive again. Storytelling activates both long-term memory and emotion, lighting up the hippocampus like a room welcoming sunlight. Old stories aren't just for telling, they're for healing. And sometimes, hearing your own voice in memory is more nourishing than any medicine. But not everyone has a grandchild to share with. Here's another way: music. Listen to old songs and quietly sing along: Yesterday by the Beatles, or a nameless tune you heard at age 20. The brain stores music in its own way, and the hippocampus always responds strongly to familiar melodies. Ms. Rose, once showing signs of memory decline, improved just by playing her favorite youth songs and softly singing each morning. Even if the lyrics faded, the feelings stayed whole. Maybe memory, like music, never truly disappears, it just waits for the right tune to return. But if you want something more active, start with your feet. Walk in the sunlight 10 minutes to pump blood into memory. Mr. David, 79, once struggled with sleep and forgetfulness, began walking each morning at 7 a.m., under soft sunlight. Just 10 minutes. But what happened after a month was remarkable: he slept better, remembered more, spoke more clearly. Sunlight boosts vitamin D absorption, walking increases blood flow to the brain. These two together are lifeblood for the hippocampus, the area most prone to oxygen shortage when circulation slows. Each steady step is a heartbeat for the brain. And sometimes, all you need is to step outside, and your memory opens. But there's one more thing, essential for brain cell survival: nutrition. Eat boiled eggs and salmon just a few times a week is enough, no need for pricey brain supplements. Just boiled eggs with the yolk and pan-seared salmon. These two foods provide choline and omega-3 golden nutrients for the hippocampus and cerebral blood vessels. Mr. Peter, 81, once took countless supplements with no effect. But when he switched to eating eggs and salmon every other day, he recalled even his old wartime friend's phone number. You don't need much. You just need the right things. Your brain doesn't ask for extravagance, only that you listen and care. Bit by bit, each day. And the most amazing part, all these actions take less than 10 minutes. But they give you more years, more memory, and sometimes one more peaceful afternoon with someone whose name you won't forget. A day in Grandma Helen's life and why her voice remained strong. She didn't fight aging. She just chose not to lose her memory the way others gave up. I first met Grandma Helen on an April afternoon, at a small nursing home in the suburbs of Michigan. She was 84. Frail, but quick. Her voice wasn't weak or shaky, it was steady, as if something inside her had never been taken by time. I came to assess memory for a group of seniors there. And Helen was the only one who answered every question correctly, from her doctor's name, last night's dinner, to the nurse's name on the morning shift. I asked, "Do you have a secret?" She looked at me, smiled, and replied, "I don't let myself drift away each day. I hold on to myself, bit by bit." Then she shared about her day. 6 a.m. she woke up without touching the phone or turning on the TV. The first thing she did was handwrite on a small piece of paper what day it was, how the weather felt, what she ate yesterday, and what she dreamed of last night. No one told her to do that. She just believed that by writing, she was pulling together the small fragments of her mind to piece into an orderly memory stream. 7 a.m. she walked around the garden for 15 minutes. No talking. No music. Just listening to her footsteps and breath. "I walk to get blood flowing to my head. I breathe so my mind won't go quiet," she said. And it's true, steady steps under morning sun are the simplest way to keep blood flowing to the hippocampus, the region that controls memory, orientation, and emotion. 9 a.m. she called her granddaughter. Retold an old story. One day she talked about her wedding. Another day about the first time she became a mother. Not for someone else to hear, but for herself to remember. Each story was like a movie she replayed in her own voice. Noon she ate a boiled egg, a piece of salmon, and a bit of fruit. No fancy menu. No brain pills. Just natural, balanced, and consistent. She didn't go extreme with dieting, but never left her stomach empty. Her meals were messages she sent to her brain saying, "I'm still alive, still loving, still wanting to remember." Afternoon she read poetry out loud. No one listened except herself. Every word she read, familiar or not, was a tap on her language center. A way to train her voice not to fade, and her thoughts not to break. I asked, "Why not just listen to the radio?" She replied, "Because when I listen, my brain sleeps. When I read, it wakes." Evening she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for that day. Her final line before going to bed was always, "I'm thankful for today because I still remember it clearly." A day like that repeated over and over, not complicated, not rushed. But that was exactly why her voice never faltered, her eyes never dulled, and her memories stayed intact to this day. I don't think Grandma Helen resisted aging. I think she just didn't ignore it. She didn't try to cling to youth. She simply chose to keep what made her, her. I asked her, "How do you still remember your youngest grandchild's name when so many your age can't?" And her answer caught my throat, "Because I remember every day I've loved." But the truth is, not everyone is as lucky as Grandma Helen. Because there's a truth no one wants to hear but must know. The truth no one wants to hear, but must know. Stroke never comes suddenly. It knocks on the door first, very lightly. But we didn't open. I used to think, like many people, that stroke was a sudden incident like a storm striking in the night. But after hundreds of cases I've followed, hundreds of brain scans, hundreds of stories from loved ones, I finally understood one painful truth: stroke doesn't come suddenly. It passes through each brain cell long before. The only problem is we didn't see it. Or we saw, but didn't believe. Or believed, but did nothing. The hippocampus, the frontal lobe, the language area. Each has its own way of speaking up. They don't scream. They don't get angry. They just whisper. A forgotten word. A mistaken route. A repeated phrase. A heartbeat that comes a bit late. A sleepless night. A moment when you call your grandchild the wrong name. I know, those things are easy to overlook. Because who hasn't forgotten something? Who hasn't felt slow or confused sometimes? But if you're over 60 and those things happen often, then please don't call it aging. Call it what it really is, a warning. One time, I sat beside a female patient, Mrs. Marlene, 70 years old. Before the stroke, she once told her daughter, "I feel like there's a thin fog in my head. It doesn't hurt, but things aren't clear anymore." The daughter laughed, thinking her mom was just a bit dazed. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Marlene couldn't speak anymore. That's what I want you to know, the truth no one wants to hear, but must know. Stroke always gives signs. They just don't look like pain. They look like the silence of something slowly fading. And you can't wait until memory disappears to learn how to protect it. You can't wait until the voice breaks off to learn how to train it again. You can't wait until you recognize loved ones with the puzzled eyes of someone who no longer knows who they are. I know, what I'm saying isn't easy to hear. But I don't say it to frighten you. I say it so you can still turn back in time. Because there's another truth, a more beautiful and hopeful one that I've seen in so many patients: the brain can recover. Memory can return. Connections can shine again. You just have to start a little earlier. But if you're still reading this, it means you're not too late. And it means you truly want to protect something more precious than health, memory, voice, and your very self. So before we end, I want to leave you with a question and a promise. I send you a question and a promise. If there's a memory you don't want to lose, how would you hold on to it? No memory is too old to protect. A name you once called with all your love. An afternoon sitting quietly beside someone, without needing to speak. A moment when your eyes met, and nothing had to be explained. They are there not to be displayed. They are there so you still know who you are, and how you once lived. No one is ever too late to begin again. Maybe you've forgotten a few things. Maybe you felt confused when memories don't line up. But that doesn't make you any less. It's just a gentle reminder, it's time to care for yourself again. Slowly. Gently. No one expects you to remember a whole life. Just that you remember how to love yourself, starting with one small act each day. And if your heart softened a little while reading these words, maybe you're already ready to protect the most precious parts of yourself. Not with pills. Not with rushed efforts. But with perseverance, gentleness, and honesty with your own memories. If you need a place to remind you that you're not forgotten, not too late, not alone, then I'll still be here every week telling you real stories, from those who were once lost, then found light again in their memory. Follow the Thrive 60 Plus channel, not for me, but because you deserve to be loved, and you deserve to be remembered.